I'm Tori. I'm 28 years old. For as long as I can remember, my father told me I was too attractive to be his child. He claimed my blonde hair and blue eyes were proof that my mother had been unfaithful. According to him, my appearance was evidence of a betrayal that never happened. When he insisted that I take a DNA test before he would agree to walk me down the aisle, I eventually accepted. What the results revealed didn't just disprove his accusations. They showed that I wasn't biologically related to him or to my mother. What we later uncovered at the hospital where I was born caused my father to collapse in front of 60 family members. Before we continue, if you appreciate stories centered on truth and hidden family histories, consider liking and subscribing, but only if this story genuinely speaks to you. Feel free to share your location and local time in the comments. I'd like to know where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back 6 weeks to the night my father delivered his ultimatum. It was a Sunday dinner at my parents' home in Fairfield, Connecticut, a 6-bedroom, Tudor-style house my father often reminded us he had built through his own hard work. The dining room was immaculate, filled with restoration hardware furniture and Wedgwood china that my mother polished weekly, as though order and shine could shield her from his constant blame. My grandmother, Eleanor, sat at the far end of the table. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and she watched my father with the focus of someone who trusted him very little. My brother Marcus, 31, the favored child, stared down at his plate. My mother, Diane, held her linen napkin tightly, as if grounding herself. Then Gerald Townsend cleared his throat. "I won't be attending your wedding, Tori." The words hit hard. My mother's fork slipped from her hand. "Gerald," she said quietly, "please, not tonight." He ignored her. Reaching into his jacket, he removed a folded document and slid it across the table toward me. "I've thought this through," he said calmly, almost as if rehearsed. "I won't walk another man's daughter down the aisle, not until this is settled." I looked down. It was a consent form for a paternity DNA test from a nearby clinic. His signature was already at the bottom. "You have 6 weeks. Take the test, share the results with the family. If you're mine, I'll attend. I'll even apologize." He smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. "But we both know what the test will show." My grandmother set her teacup down sharply. My mother began crying quietly. I stared at the Rolex on my father's wrist, reflecting the chandelier's light, and thought, he's been preparing for this for 28 years. I didn't sign the form. I didn't leave either. I simply said, "Thank you for the reminder, Gerald. I won't forget this." And I meant it. That dinner didn't shock me. By 28, I understood that my father's behavior followed a pattern, consistent and unyielding. I was 7 the first time I realized I was treated differently. I'd overheard him shouting at my mother through their bedroom door. "Look at that blonde hair! Where did it come from, Diane? Certainly not from me." At 12, I wanted to join the school volleyball team. Gerald refused to sign the permission slip. "I'm not investing in someone else's child," he said, right in front of Marcus, who received new baseball cleats that same week. When Marcus turned 18 and went to Boston University, Gerald covered everything: tuition, housing, meals, spending money. When I was accepted into nursing school, he looked at me across the same table and said, "Your real father can pay for it." So I took out loans. I worked double shifts at a diner. 6 years later, I graduated with $60,000 in debt and a degree I earned without his help. The hardest part wasn't the financial strain or missed chances. It was watching what his constant accusations did to my mother. Every disagreement about money, trips, Marcus's career, eventually circled back to me. He was his leverage, his proof, his reminder of what he claimed she'd done. The night before I left for college, my grandmother pulled me aside. "Keep every document from the hospital where you were born," she said firmly. "Your birth certificate, any records. I have a feeling they'll matter someday." I didn't understand then, but I kept them. 18 years later, I finally learned why. That night, I returned to my apartment in Hartford, a modest one-bedroom apartment filled with second-hand furniture and determination. Nathan was waiting, reviewing client floor plans on his laptop. 2 glasses of wine sat on the table. He knew immediately. What did he do? Time. I told him everything. The DNA form, the ultimatum, the deadline. His jaw tightened as I spoke. "Maybe you should just do it," he said. "Take the test, prove him wrong, end this." I set my glass down and looked at my engagement ring, a simple diamond Nathan had designed from a sketch I'd drawn years earlier. "I'm not about proving him wrong anymore," I said. "It's about freeing my mother." Nathan didn't respond. He already knew what came next. 5 years ago, my grandmother called me at 2 a.m. She'd found my mother in the bathroom with an empty bottle of sleeping pills. Paramedics arrived just in time. Since then, Diane had been on antidepressants, attending therapy twice a week, rebuilding herself slowly. Gerald never apologized. He never acknowledged what his accusations had done. He simply kept insisting he was right. My mother gave him 35 years of loyalty. He repaid her with nearly 3 decades of doubt. That night, I searched for an independent genetics lab, one certified, reputable, and completely unconnected to Gerald. "I'll take the test," I told Nathan, "but on my terms." 2 weeks later, Gerald turned 60. His birthday party was held at the Fairfield Country Club overlooking Long Island Sound. 30 relatives gathered to celebrate the man who had made my mother's life unbearable. I wore a plain black dress. Nathan squeezed my hand. 2 hours, he whispered. "We can manage 2 hours." We couldn't. Midway through dinner, after several glasses of wine, Gerald stood to speak. He thanked everyone, praised Marcus's career, and toasted my mother's patience. Then his eyes settled on me. "I see my daughter is here," he said, emphasizing the word. A few relatives laughed nervously. "I hope she's been considering our conversation about proving where she really comes from." The room fell silent. "Dad," Marcus said, starting to stand, "this isn't the time." Gerald waved him off. "Family should be honest," he said, smiling at me. "You know what they call a bird that lays its eggs in another nest? A cuckoo. The egg looks lovely, but it doesn't belong." Someone gasped. Someone else laughed. My mother stared down, tears landing on the Cartier bracelet Gerald had given her after one of their worst fights. I stood. "Thank you for the reminder, Gerald," I said evenly. "I won't forget this." Then I turned to my mother. "Would you like to step outside?" She took my hand. Together we walked out, past the whispers, past the stairs, past the man who had tried for 28 years to break us. But it wasn't over. In the parking lot, my grandmother hurried after us. "Tori, wait!" Eleanor Whitmore was 78, poised and sharp-eyed. She had never trusted Gerald. "There's something you need to know," she said urgently. "Something I should have told you long ago." She led us to a bench overlooking the course as the sun set. "The night you were born," she said quietly, "something wasn't right at St. Mary's Hospital." My mother stiffened. "The nurse brought you out while your grandfather was still alive. She was shaking. She handed you over too quickly and rushed out." My mother looked at her in shock. "You never told me this." "I tried to investigate," she said. "The hospital refused to answer questions, but I made a copy of your birth record before everything was sealed." She handed it to me. "Time of birth, 11:47 p.m. "I gave birth at 11:58, my mother said slowly. "I remember the clock. 11 minutes. Something happened." "There's a name here," my grandmother added. "The head nurse, Margaret Sullivan. I have her address." The next morning, I went to the lab with 3 DNA samples, mine, my mother's, and strands of my father's hair taken from his guest bathroom brush. 3 weeks later, the results arrived. 0% match with Gerald. 0% match with Diane. I wasn't their biological child. Gerald had been wrong about the affair, but right about one thing. I wasn't his daughter. The only question left was, whose was I? I went to my parents' house the next morning while Gerald was out. My mother read the report in silence. When she looked up, her voice shook. "This has to be wrong." "I checked," I said. "There's no mistake." "But I gave birth to you." Her voice rose and fractured. "I was in labor for 14 hours. I felt you leave my body. I saw you, Tori. You were red, screaming, and you were mine." I took her hands. They were cold to the touch. "I believe you," I said, "which means there's only one explanation. Something went wrong at the hospital. Someone switched us." Silence settled between us, tight and fragile. "The time," my mother said suddenly. "The birth certificate says 11:47, but I remember watching the clock because the contractions were unbearable. You were born at 11:58. I always wondered why it didn't match." 11 minutes. 11 minutes that altered two families permanently. "Mom," I said carefully, "if I'm not your biological daughter, that means your daughter is out there somewhere, 28 years old, living a life that should have been yours." My mother broke down. Not the quiet tears my father always caused, but deep, uncontrollable sobs. "We have to find her," she said. "We have to find them both." I need to pause here. If you're watching this and you've ever felt out of place in your own family, like something about you never quite fit, I see you. This story isn't finished, and the truth is about to get far more complicated. If you want to know what really happened at that hospital, subscribe and share your theories in the comments. Now, let me tell you about the nurse who finally spoke. Gerald learned about the DNA test before I could prepare. Marcus, always loyal, noticed the GAN trust confirmation email on my mother's phone during a lunch visit. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. Gerald sounded pleased before I even spoke. What did it say? Was I right? I stayed silent. I didn't know how to explain that he was both wrong and right. "I knew it," he said, laughing openly. 28 years, Tori. I told everyone and no one believed me, but I was right." "Gerald," I asked, "does Mom know?" "Of course she knows," he replied. "She's probably crying right now, figuring out how to twist this." I could hear him pacing, energized. "I'm emailing the family again, this time with proof." "You don't understand," I said. "I understand perfectly," he snapped. "You're not my daughter. Diane lied to me for almost 30 years, and now everyone will know what kind of woman she is." He hung up before I could explain that Diane hadn't lied at all. Within an hour, he told my mother to move out. "I want you gone by the end of the month," he said. "I'm finished with your lies." My grandmother arrived immediately to stay with her. When I came that evening, my mother was curled on the couch, fragile and exhausted, while my grandmother stood nearby, watchful. "He thinks he's won," I said quietly. My grandmother met my eyes. "Then it's time he hears the rest." The next 3 days were the hardest of my life. I considered postponing the wedding, not because of Gerald, but because I didn't want my mother's truth buried under celebrations. Nathan refused. "We're getting married," he said firmly. "Your father doesn't control our future." Still, I couldn't move forward without answers, and those answers lived with Margaret Sullivan. I called her repeatedly, 5 times in 3 days. No response. On the 6th attempt, I left a different message. "Mrs. Sullivan, my name is Tori Townsend. I know you remember me. I have certified DNA evidence proving a baby was switched at St. Mary's on March 15th, 1997. I'm not trying to blame anyone or sue anyone. I just need to know who I am." I paused. "If you don't call me back, my next step will be legal. Hospital records will be subpoenaed. An investigation will follow. Whatever has been hidden for 28 years will come out publicly." 2 hours passed. At 4:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. Thursday, 2 p.m., Riverside Diner, Bridgeport. Come alone. I stared at the message, then replied, "I'll be there." Riverside Diner looked frozen in time, patched vinyl booths, an old jukebox that coffee never seemed fresh. Margaret Sullivan sat in a corner booth. She was 72, smaller than I expected, her hands shaking around her mug. When I sat down, she looked at me closely. "You look just like her," she said. "Linda, your biological mother." My heart skipped. "You know her?" Margaret closed her eyes. "I've carried this for 28 years," she said, "every day." She pulled out a worn leather journal, her shift log from that night. I read, 11:47, baby girl born to Diane Townsend. 11:58, baby girl born to Linda Morrison. 12:32 a.m., incident, trainee nurse mixed infants after bathing. 2:15 a.m., error discovered. Decision, correct records, not families. "They knew?" I whispered. "That night?" "They said switching you back would be worse," she replied. "They threatened my license. I signed an NDA." "Who was the other baby?" She showed me a profile photo. "Rachel Morrison," she said. "She's 28. She lives in Springfield." That night I stared at Rachel's LinkedIn profile. Elementary school teacher, volunteer, brown hair, brown eyes. I rewrote the message 17 times before sending it. 24 hours later, my phone rang. "Is this Tori?" It was Rachel. "My whole life," she said, "people said I didn't look like my parents. My dad used to joke the hospital mixed things up." We talked for 3 hours. 10 days later, her DNA results arrived. 99.97% match with Gerald. 99.98% match with Diane. Rachel was their daughter. 3 days later, at my engagement party, Gerald stood confidently before 60 guests and revealed my DNA results, thinking it was his moment. But then I stepped forward. "You're right," I said calmly. "I'm not your biological daughter, but your daughter is here." Rachel walked in, and in that moment, Gerald's certainty collapsed, because the truth, finally, was public. "They threatened our jobs and our pensions. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." I turned back to Gerald. His hands were gripping the edge of the platform as if he were trying to steady himself. "You wanted science, Gerald," I said. "This is it. Every document, every signature, every 11 minutes that changed 2 families forever." Standing there with Rachel beside me, I felt something I had never felt in 28 years. Not relief for myself, but vindication for my mother, for every tear she cried, every accusation she endured, every night she lay awake wondering if her own husband would ever trust her. If this story connects with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the truth takes decades to come out. Now, let me tell you what happened when Gerald finally understood. For 28 years, Gerald Townsend had been certain his wife betrayed him, certain his daughter was proof, certain his suspicion made him righteous, that his harshness was justified, that science would one day prove him right. Science did speak, but it dismantled everything he had built his identity on. He looked at Rachel, a stranger who shared his face and his blood, and something inside him broke. He looked at the DNA results that confirmed part of his belief while exposing the rest as false. He looked at Margaret Sullivan, whose shaking testimony erased nearly 3 decades of accusations. Then his knees gave way. Gerald Townsend, confident, arrogant, unwavering, collapsed onto the platform. He caught himself on one knee, his breath uneven. "I didn't know," he whispered. "How could I have known?" "You could have trusted her," I said quietly, my voice carrying through the room. "You could have looked for answers instead of assuming the worst about the woman who loved you. Genetics are complex. Recessive traits exist. Hospitals make mistakes. But you chose suspicion. You chose cruelty. For 28 years, you punished my mother and me for something that never happened." A chair scraped across the floor. Marcus stood. For a moment, I thought he would defend Gerald as he always had. Instead, he walked past him and went straight to our mother. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm sorry. I should have said something years ago." Diane pulled him into an embrace. Gerald stayed on his knees, watching his family choose each other. For 28 years, my mother had lived under Gerald's shadow. Accusations at breakfast, at dinner, and everywhere in between. She cried herself to sleep more times than anyone knew. She stayed because she believed he might one day see the truth. Now the truth was everywhere, on screens, in documents, and in the face of a daughter who carried her blood. Diane stepped forward. The crowd parted. She stopped in front of Gerald. 28 years, she said, steady and clear. "I stayed because I loved you, because I believed you would trust me, because I thought our family was worth fighting for." "Diane, She raised her hand. "Not yet." The room was silent. "You owe me an apology in front of everyone who received that email. You owe Tori an apology for every birthday you ruined, every milestone you ignored, every time you made her feel like she didn't belong." She gestured toward Rachel. "And you owe Rachel an apology for not being the father she deserved." Gerald's shoulders shook. "I didn't need the world to believe me," Diane said softly. "I needed you to." She turned away and walked to Rachel. "Hello," she said through tears. "I'm your mother. I'm sorry it took so long." Gerald tried 3 times to stand. No one helped him. When he finally reached the microphone, his voice was barely recognizable. "I was wrong," he said. 3 words, 28 years late. "I was wrong about Diane. She never betrayed me. I accused her for almost 30 years, and I was wrong." He looked at me, not with suspicion, but regret. "Tori, I took things from you I can never return. Your childhood, your trust. I'll repay your student loans, all of them. It's not enough, but it's a start." Then he turned to Rachel. "I missed everything. Your life. That's something I'll regret forever." Rachel wiped her eyes. "We can start now if you're willing to be a father instead of a judge." He nodded. My grandmother handed him a tissue. "Clean yourself up, Gerald," she said calmly. "You have work to do." 1 week later, I drove to Springfield. Linda Morrison's house was modest but warm. She opened the door before I knocked, blonde hair touched with gray, blue eyes identical to mine. "Tori," she said, her voice unsteady. She hugged me, and for the first time it felt like home. We talked for hours. She showed me photos of her life, of my biological grandparents, of the years lost to a mistake. She told me about my biological father, David, who had passed away without knowing the truth. She used to say Rachel had old soul eyes, she said. They were yours. I shared my own childhood photos, the girl who never quite fit, the woman who finally understood why. "I don't want to replace Diane. She's your mother," she agreed, "but maybe there's room for more." "I'd like that," she smiled. 2 months later, I married Nathan. My mother walked me down the aisle. Rachel stood beside me. Linda sat in the front row. Gerald sat quietly, accepting his place. Eleanor toasted to truth, no matter how long it takes. The lawsuit lasted 8 months. The hospital settled. Apologies were issued. Protocols changed. We didn't sue for revenge. We sued so no one else would live a lie for decades. Now, in our new apartment, surrounded by photos and family, both born and chosen, I understand something clearly. DNA doesn't make a family. Love does. On the table lies a test, positive. This child will be loved without condition. That's the only proof that matters. If you've ever been accused unfairly, know this. Truth surfaces. Sometimes it takes time, but it comes. Trust is a choice. Doubt is easy, and decades of doubt can destroy everything. Thank you for listening. Share this story if it matters to you, and until next time, trust the truth.